Well, hi everyone. Well, welcome to our webinar today. As you can see, I've moved location and moved to a new race course today. So thanks very much indeed for joining us. And hopefully Richard will be coming online in a moment if we can get the technology going. Brilliant. Richard, I can see you. Can you see me? At the moment, let's just can't hear you. Just bear with me a second. Let's get let's just can you, yeah, we can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect, great.
I'm sorry, my camera, I don't know what's wrong matter with my laptop. Camera's got a slight sort of soft focused look to it. I'm not quite sure what that's all about. Even been cleaning it with a cotton bud this morning, but no, to no effect, it seems.
It's isn't it what models use when they're trying to look very beautiful and stunning?
I think I'm past that. I think I'm past that. Yeah.
All right, well, we've got lots of people joining us, which is great. So so I'll just let's just run down who we've got. Lots of Foxtrot members joining us. So I'm just having a look at my list here. Adele Brown, Rodney Hayward, Brian Middleton, David and Sue Nichols, David Smith, Deborah Clayton, Gordon Bendel, Jessica Buckle, John Clark, Les Merrick. We've got Phil Chappell, Liz Law, Richard King, Rodney Hayward, Sue Smith, Tony Bird, Val Atkinson. So thanks very much indeed for joining us. Lots more people joining us all the time.
Great.
Just before we get going with Richard, let me just explain to everyone how this is going to work. So I'll ask Richard some questions, but from those people watching, at the bottom of your screen you should see a sort of Q&A button. If you press that, you'll be able to send in some questions, which we'll then relay on to Richard. If you want to be brave, there's also a hands up option, and if you press that, we can unmute you and you can ask a question directly to him yourself. So please do send in lots of questions. Great opportunity to ask Richard questions today. You'll also notice that behind me, I'm visiting a race course. Every day for our webinar week, I'm at a different course. Yesterday, I forgot to tell you, I was at Ludlow. So Ludlow yesterday.
Doctor today.
No, Richard, no.
I got that wrong.
It's a surprise. It's a surprise.
Oh, sorry.
Don't ruin it.
You asked me.
So no one heard that. So at the end, I'll tell you the answer. I'll tell you the answer at the end. So yesterday was Ludlow, and today it's a mystery. Who knows? Who knows where I am? Great. So still lots of people joining us. So don't forget, if you've got any questions, please just click on the Q&A at the bottom, or you can press the hands up button and we'll come to you and unmute you. A couple of people asked me after yesterday's webinar, can we see you? And just to confirm, we've no idea what you're up to in your house. We can't see you at all. All your videos are turned off. So whether or not you're still doing Joe Wicks out in the garden or still in your pajamas, it doesn't matter because we've got no way to see what you're up to at all. So all your cameras are turned off. Your microphones are all muted. So whatever you're up to in your own house is entirely your own business. Great. Well, Richard, it's just gone 12 o'clock, so should we get going? And perhaps I can ask, first of all, to sort of ask you a little bit about how you are, how your family is, how you're coping, staying safe at home.
Touchwood, all right. Yeah, it's a bit of a shock to the system. As someone who's a complete racing freak, the biggest adjustment I found is getting used to race courses like Will Rogers Downs and Fauna Park and other such places I've never heard of in my life. But I hear this morning from inside sources that France are planning on resuming on the 11th of May. So I hope we won't be too far behind that. But no, coping all right. And actually, I think in some respects, it's actually been quite nice to have a bit of, downtime and a bit of thinking time. I don't think it's all bad.
So can you just tell us a little bit about sort of growing up, and where did your interest in racing come from?
My interest came in an absolutely direct line from my father, who as a young man was obsessed by racing. He, when he left school, he went to work in Newmarket as a stable lad. He grew very late in his teens, but relatively quickly grew out of being the right size to be a stable lad. And he then went to work in various stud farms. He worked in Sledmere up in Yorkshire, worked at Woodlands in Newmarket in the late 1950s, when the sire roster there included Never Say Die, Lycidon, the great Hyperion, who by that stage was about 28 or 29, and Never Say Die. It was quite a stallion roster they had there. And he then, when he finished there, he took a very good horse called Pipe of Peace, who had been a champion 2-year-old in Europe in 1956 and was third in the Guineas and the Derby behind Crapello in 1957. He was syndicated to Australia to stand as a stallion. My old man took him out there on a boat, which is a slightly more different game from jumping on a plane at Stansted. It was a 6-week passage, and he stayed with him in his first season out there. And so I got my love of the game completely from him, but I wasn't brought up with horses or around horses. So my route into the racing game was, I guess, like many, I went to work for a bookmaker. My first job, having left university somewhat prematurely, was spending 5 days a week sitting behind the till of a betting shop in Acton High Street. And I worked there very happily for 3.5 years, and that certainly did nothing to quell the my love of the game, which persists to this day.
Yeah. So just a reminder to everyone, please don't forget to put in some question and answers at the bottom. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so if you click on there, you can type in any questions and we'll pass those on to Richard later on. But Richard, obviously we're all owners in the game, and you yourself, you've delved into the ownership side of racing as well.
I have. I've got, for my sins, I've got 4 children, and before school fees made me realise that I didn't actually have any money, I did buy one in my own name in a moment of madness in 2004, who was actually not a bad horse. He was trained by a small trainer in Newmarket called Hugh Collingridge, who was a lovely man. And he won first time up at Windsor, completely unfancied, unbacked, and went on. He was a decent horse. He was 4th in a listed race at Ayr, but he's perhaps most famous for being, he ended up in the High Court, believe it or not, because he won a race at Ripon. He beat a horse of Reg Bonds, trained by Brian Smart, called Bond City, which was the, who was ridden, here comes the first clue, he was ridden by Fergal Lynch. And he ended up in the High Court because it was the 27th race in question in the Miles Rogers race fixing scandal. Anyway, I had great fun with him. He was a lovely horse called Sundance. He was one of Namid's first crop. Then when school fees bit, I decided to back off completely. And some great friends from, I worked in the city for many years, some great friends in the city who were a bit younger and didn't have the school fees burden that I had. Every year were trying to persuade me to get involved with their syndicate, and every year I was telling them to take a walk because school fees were crippling. And then in early 2013, they got in touch and said, right, come on, this is it. Henry Candy, who trains for us now, had bought a horse at the Breeze Ups for, relatively speaking, buttons. I think he cost 16,000. He was one of Hatif's first crop. He was obviously with Henry Candy, and they said, right, come on, 10%. It'll cost you £3,000 for the year. And I thought, oh God, that's a lot cheaper than anything I've heard before. Sod it, I'll do it. It'll shut him up if nothing else. And then blow me down, this horse turned out to be a bit of a superstar. And by September of that year, he'd won the Acomb Stakes, Group 3 Acomb Stakes at the Ebor meet at York, where he beat a horse of Kevin Ryan's called the Grey Gatsby, who of course the following season went on to win the French Derby and various other races and the Irish Champion. And we very sensibly cashed our chips and sold them to Hong Kong for a pretty stupid price. And I've been involved in a small way ever since in flat horses. I'm afraid I'm not emotionally strong enough to be involved in jumpers. It would be, for me, it'd be a bit like watching Doctor Who from behind the sofa through my fingers.
Well, no, it's really interesting, and it sounds like you've been fairly lucky at times as well with your ownership. So maybe reasonably fortunate. We'll have to get involved in a Foxtrot syndicate and change your theory about the jumpers. So, just moving on to Racing Welfare, can you just explain to us what your role is with the charity?
Absolutely. I've been a trustee of the charity for about the last 4.5 years. I first got involved with them actually through I did a rather ludicrous charity project a few years ago, called Walking the Courses. I essentially linked all 60 of Britain's race courses in a series of walks. So I walked from Newmarket to Towcester to Ascot to Newbury to Bath to Taunton to Exeter, Newton Abbot, and so on and so forth, all around the country. Over the course of about 13 months, arriving at each race course on the day of a race meeting, because there had to be a little bit of carrot to go with the stick. And then we turned each race meeting into a bit of a fundraiser. And I was raising money for two charities. Firstly, for a cancer charity, Pancreatic Cancer UK, because my dear old dad, who gave me my love of the game, had sadly died a couple of years earlier of pancreatic cancer. But I also did it for Racing Welfare, because I felt very strongly that if you ask most people, I'm thrilled to say it's changing now, but you ask a lot of people in racing what the Injured Jockeys Fund do, and everybody knows. Everybody knows what the Injured Jockeys Fund does. And it's a wonderful charity that does incredible work for those absolute lunatics who go to work every day being followed by an ambulance, for whom I could not possibly have more respect. But Racing Welfare is a much, personally speaking, I think it's a much more important charity, because it looks after everybody else. And when I say everybody else, I mean everybody else. If you go racing on any day, every single person involved in that day is covered by Racing Welfare, be they a stable lad, a stud hand, a box driver, a groom, a racecourse employee, a starting stalls handler, a groundsman, a photographer, people who work in the racecourse office. The entire cohort of people who are involved in racing are looked after by Racing Welfare, potentially. And of course, we all know that, you know, particularly thinking from the people who are directly involved with the horses, we all know what an unbelievably dangerous and perilous game it can be. I've come across a lot of people who've suffered life-changing injuries as a result of, you know, skittish 2-year-olds being back for the first time, or as a result of, you know, falls on the schooling grounds. But you know, there's a lot more to Racing Welfare than simply injury. It advises on counselling, addiction issues, housing issues. It does an awful lot of work on advising people, at the moment, huge amount, on ensuring that people get their benefits and what benefits they are entitled to do, and to help them wade their way through the awful bureaucratic red tape. So it's a charity that is incredibly wide-ranging in terms of the services that it provides. It's incredibly wide-ranging in terms of where it offers those services. It's now it's got 20 welfare offices up and down the country, from Scotland to the southwest, South Wales, the East Midlands, and so on. It does about 1,500 yard visits a year. You know, that's a hell of, that's getting on for 5 visits every single day of every single week throughout the year. It's, you know, and it's a big old charity now, and I'm thrilled to say that, you know, the public profile of the charity has grown significantly, I think, in the last 5 years, primarily because it's now, in my opinion, run by an absolutely brilliant chief executive who has a superb team behind her.
Well, it sounds like a really fantastic charity, and it's, you know, very good explanation. Thank you for that, Richard. It just sounds, I mean, how is it funded? There's obviously a huge amount of work going on.
Well, it is largely, it's funded by, you know, by donations from, you know, individuals, from trusts, a very small amount of legacy income, but it is very small. It is fortunately currently receiving some help from the Racing Foundation, who are custodians of the money that was raised by the levy, and they are helping significantly. But the amount of help that Racing Welfare needs is huge, for 2 reasons. Firstly, obviously, as we speak right now, in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, firstly, the demand for Racing Welfare services has never, ever been higher, both in terms of, you know, people looking for financial assistance, to people looking for occupational health assistance, for people looking for help with, you know, benefits, for people looking for, it's a huge, there's been an explosion of demand. To put that into context, demand for services of Racing Welfare from the beginning of March to the end of the second week of April were up 640% on last year in terms of number of people picking the phone up. Now that in itself presents challenges, not just financial, but also in personnel terms. But there is also the other side of the coin, which is frankly no prettier, which is that the vast majority of Racing Welfare's fundraising events schedule has been blown out of the water. For example, a 300-seat lunch in the presence of Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, who is patron of Racing Welfare, was scheduled to happen at Aintree on the Thursday of the Grand National meeting. Gone. It's estimated that we will have, in terms of fundraising gap, we will be short of between 550 and 600,000 pounds of fundraising income this year, directly as a result, purely and simply, of those fundraising events being cancelled. So, that puts a massive, massive strain on the one end of the sausage machine, the money coming in, whilst there is massive strain on the other end of the sausage machine, which is the services going out. So, I know, Racing Welfare are no different from most other charities. It's an incredibly difficult time for the charity sector. But I think, Racing Welfare has recently launched a sort of emergency appeal to try and raise £500,000 to try and plug this funding gap. Thanks to one anonymous benefactor who very kindly put his hand in his pocket to the tune of 10% of that. We've had a great start, but there's a long way to go. But it is, the work that they do is so important and so vital, and you so rarely hear of so much of it. I met so many people when I was traipsing around the country from, Fosterhouse to Chepstow, or from Perth to Musselburgh, or from, Kelso to Hexham. I came across so many people whose lives have been massively, massively positively enhanced by Racing Welfare and the work that they do. And it's such an important charity, it really is. And, you think of the breadth of people involved and how much they rely when things get tough, because they're not, with the best will in the world, jockeys are, generally speaking, in a better position. They have better insurance, they have pensions, they have medical insurance, they have permanent health insurance. A lot of them are in reasonable shape if things go wrong. Regrettably, that is not the case for an awful lot of people who work in racing yards or work on racecourses.
And we've had a question from Deborah Clayton, who'd just like to know, how long has Racing Welfare existed? Do you know how it came about?
That's a very good question. I wondered if someone might ask that. So I tried to find it in the 20 minutes before we sat down for this discussion. I didn't find it. I think it's about 25 years. I think in terms of its perception, I found when I was doing walking the courses, I managed to get myself quite a lot of publicity during that, partly as a result of local press, partly as a result of generally doing an interview with a race day presenter on our race day. What I generally found as I wandered around talking to people was that most people were not aware of Racing Welfare. They didn't know what it was. And I think that has to some extent changed significantly in the last few years. As I say, largely as a result, I think, of a really brilliant executive team who they've got now. Dawn Goodfellow, who used to run the Northern Racing School, is now chief exec, who is absolutely brilliant. Simone Sear, who won the David McDonald Community Award at the Godolphin Stud and Stable Awards this year, who's head of welfare, is an absolutely brilliant, brilliant woman. And I think where Racing Welfare has really succeeded is, having been a charity that was perceived to be very much Newmarket centric, it's now, I think, rightly viewed as very much a countrywide charity. And it's a charity now which trainers, having been rather standoffish about for many years, are now incredibly on the front foot about. Whether it's coincidence or not, we did a lot of work last year in conjunction with John Moores University in Liverpool on the mental stresses and strains and mental health issues of trainers, because it's quite easy to forget about trainers, in the sense that everyone thinks of the poor old stable staff and the grooms and but it's the trainers who are carrying the burden of not just all the staff they've got, but also, dare I say, all the owners they've got, who are finding this time as frustrating as anybody, and the financial pressures that trainers work under are significant, and we've seen a significant uptick in referrals from trainers and assistant trainers. And so, the perception of the charity has really, really taken off, I think, in the last few years. But to answer the question, it's been around, I think, between 20 and 25 years.
I think you've been very generous to yourself. because I think the key thing for me, certainly in terms of the charity, was your Walking the Courses initiative. And I think for a lot of people that really did put the charity on the map, quite literally. So I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about that idea. You've already explained sort of how it came about and why you did it, obviously partly for your father's prostate cancer as well. What I'd quite be interested to know, having done a bit more exercise perhaps in the last couple of weeks than I would normally, how did you train for it? How did you prepare for it?
Quite extensively in terms of time, but not necessarily in terms of effort. I mean, when I came up with the rather ludicrous idea, I'd been thinking for a while, having just reached the age of 50, that the only thing in my life I'd ever done for charity was to grow the most pathetic moustache you've ever seen in your life. It looked like a caterpillar with alopecia. It was just dreadful. I felt at some point I needed to do something that, meant a bit more, but didn't quite know what. And a great mate of mine when I worked in the city, who I spoke to every day, was also a racing nut. And I always remember him ringing me up saying, "Farks, I went to Great Leys yesterday, and that completes the set. I've been to every racecourse in Britain." And I thought, bloody hell, that's a great thing to have done. I wonder how many I've been to. So I sat down and I went through the list and I ticked them off, and I've been to 28. And the sort of the seed germinated then of an idea that, well, maybe I could do something for charity that involved me going to every racecourse in Britain. And I thought, well, I can't just go racing at every racecourse in Britain. No one's going to sponsor me to do that. I cannot bear running. I absolutely hate running. So that was never a runner. I've got one rather dodgy knee as a result of playing too much cricket when I was young. So riding a bike was a non-starter. I don't ride horses. And I thought, well, maybe I could walk, because, walking is not that. It's extremely good exercise. It's extremely good for you. But it's not, from a cardiovascular point of view, it's not massively taxing. And so I thought, well, maybe I could do that. And I sort of hummed and hawed and thought, well, do I really want to do that? And I thought of all the reasons then why I shouldn't do it. Like, I've got a job, like I've got a family, like, a million and one reasons. So I sort of parked it for a bit. And strangely, the sort of, the straw that broke the camel's back and actually made me do it was a man who I didn't know terribly well, but I knew well enough to sort of nod at him across the paddock, John Hills, one of Barry's sons. John died of the same cancer, pancreatic cancer, as my father died of. He was a year older than me. He had 4 kids like me. One of his kids was at the same school as my girls were at. And that was sort of 2 or 3 years after my father died. And bizarrely, that it had a very profound effect on me. Whether it was a sort of delayed reaction to my father's death or not, I don't know. But it made me think, actually, sod it, I'm really going to do something about this. And I thought, because John Hills was, as I said, I didn't know him well. I wish I had, because he lived well. And in terms of enjoyment and fun and pleasure, he loved his red wine. He loved his late nights. He loved a party. And he was much loved in Lambourne. And I thought, well, if I do it for Racing Welfare and I do it for pancreatic cancer, I'll have a half a chance of seriously engaging racing with John's legacy. So that was sort of the driver behind it. But in order to get yourself fit enough to walk, the whole project was over the course of 13 months, 2,910 miles across about 195 days of walking. Average day in the summer was probably 28 miles. Uphill, down dale. Winter, you were much more restricted, obviously, by daylight. But the only way you get fit to walk distances like that is perhaps not unsurprisingly walking. So, every day for, or sort of 4 days a week, I'd walk home from work, which was 7 miles. And then on the weekend, I lived in London at the time. And the weekend, I'd walk to Richmond Park and walk the whole way around the inside of the park twice and then walk home, which was about 24 miles. And the first time I did it, honestly, I thought, this is the most ridiculously stupid thing I've ever done. I am never going to be able to do this. God, it hurt. And you hurt in places you simply cannot believe you hurt. But it was, I did, I suppose, about 6 months of that before I started. And it was mostly the legs. I got myself into, decent shape to do it.
How did you know what routes to take when you were going to the race courses?
I was unbelievably lucky. I mean, logistically, it was a massive planning exercise, as you can imagine, because we couldn't just turn up at a race course. It had to be, the race courses had to be bought in. We had to be the charity for the day, so we shook buckets on the gate at the end of every day. It was a logistical nightmare. But I spent a long time trying to work out, you know, if you want to walk from Taunton to Exeter, you could walk along the hard shoulder of the M5. It wouldn't be a whole lot of fun, and it wouldn't be very scenic, and it wouldn't be terribly safe, but, you know, that's a pretty direct route. I spent a long time, you know, talking to, you know, the Ramblers Association, for example, who you would think would be really helpful, because they're all about walking up and down the country, and they could not possibly have been less helpful if they tried. But I ended up, actually, I was very fortunate at the end, through a friend. I was put in touch with a man, Yorkshireman in his 70s, who was chairman of something called the Long Distance Walkers Association, which I'm now a member of. And he basically planned, I rang him up and said, listen, I've had this ridiculous idea to walk from, you know, Haydock to Aintree to Uttoxeter to Chester to Bangor to Ludlow, Wolverhampton to Ludlow to, you know, on and on. But I don't know how to get from A to B. He said, well, I'll plan. You just tell me where you leave and where you want to get to. I'll plan them all. I'll map them all. I'll put you in touch with a company who manufacture handheld GPS sat-nav devices based on Ordnance Survey. Will load your routes up. And it was just brilliant because John Sparshat, just did the most amazing job. And he did it in such a way that his view was, the three priorities for him were first and foremost safety, second scenery, and third time. Because his view was, if you're going to walk, you know, 100 miles from Ludlow to Fosslass, Fosslass is a long way from anywhere by car, but you try walking there. But if you're going to walk from Ludlow to Fosslass and you're going to walk 95 miles, you might as well go the really pretty way and walk 105 miles, was his view. And he was so right. And it just, you know, I was incredibly lucky to see this country in all its absolute total majesty. And it, you know, it left me feeling very strongly that the obsession we have with where we're going on our next foreign holiday, when right under our noses is some of the most astoundingly beautiful country you will see anywhere on the planet, free, just waiting for us to go and walk through it. It was, yeah, he did an amazing job and was one of the most important people in the entire project.
So we've had a question from Liz Law that would like to know, did you have a sort of favourite leg or a favourite welcome when you got to a race course or one particular day that stands out?
Yeah, I did. Do you know, I had, I suppose at this stage I might say, well, it's terribly difficult to pick one, but actually it isn't. Because the leg I did from Cartmel to Carlisle stood out absolutely. Sorry, I'm talking nonsense. The previous leg from Catterick to Cartmel was in terms of company the most enjoyable, the most fun, the most entertaining. Essentially because I managed to persuade Oliver Sherwood and Tanya and his brother Simon, who of course rode Desi to win the Gold Cup, and his wife Lucy, and Alan King in a moment of when he'd had too much red wine one evening, and a few others, Luke Lillingston, Teddy Grimthorpe's sister. There were about 10 of us to come and do it with me. And we rented a house up in the Yorkshire Dales and we had just the best week ever. And of course, you know, Oliver and Alan, I'd given them, I'd really read the riot act to them in terms of, we are going to be walking 28 miles a day. We are going to be walking uphill down Dale. You do need to do a bit of preparation work. You really do need to think about your kit. You need to get, you know, proper new trainers. You need to be wearing lycra leggings. They, of course, ignored all of it. And Oliver was pulled up on the first day after about 14 miles with a knee problem that then required 4 months physio. And I practically crippled Kingy. At the end of the first day, having walked 27 miles, the last mile was downhill. And Alan, who had come along with walking poles, which was something else I told him to do, his knees were in such a poor way that he actually couldn't walk downhill forwards. He simply couldn't do it. So he ended up walking the last mile, walking backwards with me with my hand in the small of his back to sort of prop him up and keep him from falling over. I'll never forget him looking at me that evening and saying, Richard, you have forever changed the way in which I will train horses. Because when one of mine pulls out in the morning after a race looking a little bit pottery, I will be a lot more sympathetic than I ever have been before. But that was, they were just great fun, and we had a brilliant week. That was the outstanding leg. But scenery-wise, the outstanding leg was Cartmel to Carlisle through the Lake District. That was absolutely breathtaking.
Sounds like you had a lot of fun, even though it was definitely hard work. But presumably you haven't got any plans to do anything similarly sort of crazy in future.
Well, if you'd asked me that question 10 days ago, I'd said absolutely not a chance. Over my dead body. There were lots of wags who, when I finished it, suggested, well, when are you going to go and do it in Ireland or France or wherever? But no, I mean, you know, the trainers have gone away, the Lycra leggings have gone away, the walking the courses T-shirts have gone away. Having said that, they haven't been binned. And actually, I am going to do something next year to try and do my bit to try and plug this £500,000 hole. Because there were, you know, I've met over the last 4 years since I finished it, lots of people who said, God, I wish I'd known about it when it was going on. I'd love to have got involved. Well, all those people who said it thinking that they were never going to get any comeback actually are going to, because next April, I'm going to walk from Cheltenham to Newmarket via Lambourne. It has to be in Newmarket because I finished walking the courses on Craven Day at Newmarket in mid-April, which was a day's racing I went to with my father for 27 years in a row. It's a very, you know, special day for me, and a day full of memories. So I'm going to walk. I'm going to do, as I say, Cheltenham to Lambourne, which is about 46 miles. Have a bit of fun in Lambourne, and then Lambourne onto Newmarket. So it'll be about 155 miles in all. Again, arriving on Craven Day, and I'm going to try to get as many people involved in racing to come along. I'm going to do it at a much more gentle pace than I did it 4 years ago. So I won't be doing more than 15 miles a day. So it'll be a sort of 7-mile morning lunch rather than, you know, walking along, eating a pork pie and a bag of crisps as I'm walking. And then 7 miles in the afternoon. And I'm going to try and get people to, if people want to come along and do the whole thing, they're welcome to do it. But I'd like, Paul Nicholls has promised me he'll come and do a morning. Nicky Henderson has said he'll, you know, ring up and say nice things. I don't imagine Nicky will walk. But I'm hopeful I'll get fantastic support and get as many people as possible who are coming to walk to themselves fundraise for me.
Well, I'm sure you can rely on some support from the Foxtrot members. It sounds a great initiative and very brave, perhaps stupid to be taking on that, but it sounds great.
Well, I think it'll be fun. I mean, I say, but I really mean it. I mean, it was the best year of my life, without a shadow of doubt. It was the most fulfilling year of my life. It was, I met an enormous number of people, made some lifelong friends. It was a terrific experience. And, you know, I sort of, in a bizarre way, I miss it. I mean, even I walked the leg from Ludlow to Foss Lass, which was without any question the toughest. I did in the middle of February, over the Brecons, into, generally speaking, 40-mile-an-hour headwind, hail, snow, rain, sleet. I mean, it was just, but even that I remember fondly. But it was just a terrific experience. And I'm genuinely really looking forward to doing the mini one next year.
Well, it sounds great. And just to finish off with, Richard, I'd like to sort of move on from what we've spoken about and just talk about syndicates. I mean, you're obviously very knowledgeable about racing, about ownership. And what do you think about ownership and the future of ownership within British racing?
Well, I have to say I'm more positive than most. So I think there are a lot of very negative opinions around, which I understand, because, you know, the reality is, if you look at owning horses from a perspective of, you know, a financial decision, I mean, we all know it's completely nutty unless you're quite extraordinarily lucky. You know, we all know you might as well stand in front of a fire chucking £20 notes at it. And we all know that most horses disappoint most of the time. I mean, that's the reality. For every one that wins, 10 don't. But there is an incredible enthusiasm and a love and a passion for the sport of those who take the decision, despite the pitfalls, to get involved in ownership. And I think, I take a more positive view of the future in terms of the financials, partly because a very good friend of mine is chief executive of the Tote Group. I'm in the syndicate with him, a guy called Alex Frost. And what they are planning to do, have already done, and are planning to do with the Tote, I think could make an absolutely enormous difference to the future of British racing. Because for too long, racing really shot itself in the foot, in my humble opinion, when they sold the Tote to Fred Doane. Now, I've got nothing against Fred Doane, he's a bookmaker. But that's the point, he's a bookmaker. He's not an operator of the Tote. He's not in it for the good of British racing. He's in it for the good of Fred Doane and his brother and his shareholders. I get that, I understand that. But racing, in my opinion, should never ever have sold the Tote to Fred Doane. Alex Frost and his, and I know Alex, as I say, very well, and I know his motivation in getting involved with the Tote is because he is absolutely passionate about the sport, and he's passionate about the long-term security of the sport and the long-term health of the sport. I think, the reality is most of us owners, most of us involved in ownership, would frankly far rather bet with someone who's putting a significant amount of their profits back into racing rather than a relatively small amount of their turnover back into racing. As I say, I think, yes, at the moment, it's hard to, you're not comparing apples with pears because the takeout in the SP book is 15%. The Tote's taking 19 out on the Win book and rather more out on the exotics. But that's A, that is going to come down. B, they've already introduced some quite clever stuff, SP guarantee on the Tote. And I think there is, it's not going to happen overnight, but on a 5-year view, I think there's every reason to think that we will all be doing most of our betting on the Tote rather than with fixed odds bookmakers. Fixed odds bookmakers fundamentally don't really care about racing. I don't think. They use racing as a conduit to get people through the door, to get them to bet on football, other sports where they make much more money. Richard Flint, the chief executive of Sky Bet, said in his speech at the Jim Crack dinner a couple of years ago, they make 10 times as much money out of a football bet as they make out of a racing bet. That is startling. No wonder they're not interested in racing. So, I think that I take a more positive view of the financial health of the sport. I think there is reason to be optimistic. And I think also that, the racecourses who for too long have been allowed to get away with blue murder, relatively speaking, in terms of the money that they hold on to, of the, the media rights and so on and so forth that come through the door. I think the pressure on racecourses and the pressure on broadcasters is going to increase. And I think they will find it a force that is frankly irresistible because for the long-term benefit of themselves, they need a healthy sport. And a healthy sport needs owners who are not getting absolutely raped, which is frankly, financially, what's happening now. And the reality is, if you're involved in racing as an owner now, what's going to put you off financially from here? To me, it can't get worse. And I can see lots of reasons why it could get better.
Well, I think you've given us an ideal plug for our webinar tomorrow. So Alex Frost is joining us tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So he's tomorrow's webinar host. So we'll look forward to hearing from Alex and hearing some of those things that we've just been talking about tomorrow. So if you've not already signed up for the webinar tomorrow at 3 o'clock, please do so, because I know it's going to be absolutely fascinating. Richard, I've got one final question for you, a very last question. If anyone in Foxtrot would like to support Racing Welfare, what's the best way for them to do that?
The easiest way to do that, and very clearly, very obviously, any support that anyone is able to give would be immensely appreciated, and never more appreciated than it is now. The easiest way to do it is to go to Racing Welfare's website, which is www.racingwelfare.co.uk. And you'll find on the introduction page, there is a great big red button. It's not actually flashing, but it just says donate. That will take you straight to a page on which anybody can donate. And as I say, the support would be massively appreciated. If anybody involved in Foxtrot would like to get involved in my any part of my walk next year from Cheltenham to Lambourne and then on to Newmarket, as I say, it will be in mid-April next year. They would be really welcome to come along for any part or all. The only thing I'm going to insist on is anybody who comes to walk must raise a minimum of £500. But if anyone would like to, they're very welcome to email me close to the date. Dan will have my email address. Oh, Dan's got my email address. And as I say, everyone would be really, really welcome. It will not be physically over demanding. It will not be walking on the side of the A40 or the M4 or the M25. It will be mostly cross-country, footpaths, byways, bridleways, canals, you name it. But yeah, if anyone would like to, they'd be very welcome. But as I say, any support that anyone felt able to give to Racing Welfare would be massively appreciated.
Richard, thank you very much indeed for your time. It really is very much appreciated. And of course, did you get the race course?
I did, yeah. I walked there from Haydock for their meeting in mid-December, and it was a bit of a highlight for me because it was my last walk before Christmas of 2015, and I then had 3 weeks off before I had to walk from Windsor to Kempton to try and shift the turkey tummy post the Christmas festivities.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again for joining us. Very much is appreciated. Hopefully, we'll be seeing lots of Foxtrot members tomorrow at 3 o'clock for our webinar with Alex Frost, which should be fascinating, talking about the Tote Group. So, Richard, thanks again, and thank you very much to everyone that's joined us.
My pleasure. Stay well, everybody.